I think we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to present. We don't want to not be able to give you all the information. So I'm going to go ahead. First of all, we might as well introduce ourselves. I'm Clare Membiela. I'm the library law consultant here for the Library of Michigan. For those of you who don't know me, I work here at the Library of Michigan, helping libraries across the state understand legal issues and providing them information with what their options are with those legal issues. I also deal with establishment, helping libraries identify what their establishment is and what that means. And I work with boards, board training, board questions, board operation questions, bylaws, all that kind of stuff. My background is a law librarian. So I have a master's degree in library science and a law degree. And I've been with Library of Michigan for almost 7 years. So now, Joe, I'm going to hand it off to Joe.
Well, I'm Joe Hamlin, and I recognize a lot of these names, so I think I know most of you. I've been the library data coordinator here since 2012, so this is my 11th year. Recently, Kathy Webb, who many of you know, she's retired, and I rolled in those duties as well. So now I'm doing the library data and also state aid and penal fines, and that's what I'm working on right now for that latest collection we locked on February 1. So diligently getting those taxable values, that millage income, all of that operating income into our payment process software. So working with your libraries on that. We've got some stuff to show you around that, and state computation forms and all of that. So lots to share today.
So for those of you who will do a little destination check like they do on airlines, this is the Library of Michigan Millage session, series session 1. This is one of a 4-part session. We're talking today about your establishment and millage amounts. So in other words, how do you know how much of a millage to ask for? We already introduced ourselves. Here's some contact information. Please don't hesitate to contact Joe or I if you have any questions. Joe and I work very closely together. We even live not far from each other. So we talk a lot about these issues. So email either one of us and we'll circle around to the other, for the information as we need to. So no worries. Don't hesitate to reach out. This is a disclaimer because we will be discussing some legal issues today, not a whole lot because we have some lawyers that are going to be coming in the next couple sessions. But anything that we do talk about that relates to law, you just got to know that even though I have a law degree, I'm not your lawyer, and we're just providing information. We're not providing legal advice. Okay, you want to tell them what we're going to talk about today, Joe?
Sure. So basically, as the slide says, we're going to talk about funding in Michigan and how your establishment affects your funding, what level of millage you can go for, and using just a little bit of math, determining how much funding your library needs to meet our 0.3 of a mil of local support. And we'll show you really quickly how to calculate that easily.
Okay. So lots of exciting stuff. Hold on to your chairs. Okay, so first we're going to talk about establishment. Now, I drone on about establishment a lot, and I think this year it's going to be my goal to really kind of reinforce this. Your establishment is everything for your library. Okay, it is the identity that your library is given when you establish your library. When you create your library, you created it under a law. And in Michigan, there are 6 different laws that can create up to 10 different libraries, different types of libraries. So depending on which law you opted for or which one you could use to create your library is going to have slightly different authorities, board configurations, millage limits than other libraries. So it's really important that you understand as a board member, as a director, that you understand what your establishment is. Don't just assume what your establishment is. Actually go and dig it out and find out what your establishment is. I'm working on a list now of establishments as the Library of Michigan see them, and there is a lot of ambiguity out there. So it's really important for a lot of reasons, but your millage is one of those reasons to really know what you are. So as I said, not all libraries are the same. if you are so one of the central library establishment laws is PA 164. PA 164 is the City, Village, and Township Libraries Act. So that covers two different types of city libraries, village libraries, and township libraries. Now, note I said two different kinds of city libraries. So even within the same act, there's two different types of libraries for the same municipal entity. So depending on your establishment, some library types, like a district library, can get a dedicated millage that doesn't add to the municipal millage limit, right? So the constitutional millage limit of 15, a dedicated millage that's specifically for the library under PA 164 or the District Library Establishment Act does not add to your municipality's millage limit. That's a big benefit. So it's a separate kind of standalone millage. Other millages, like millages that are adopted by those libraries that are run by their municipalities, so may have millages that will contribute to their municipalities' limit on their constitutional limit on their millage. So things like county libraries, if you're a city library under the Home Rule City Act, where you're a department of your city and you have a millage, that millage is more than likely is going to come under your millage limit. So that's a big difference. PA 164 libraries, township, city, village libraries, and district libraries each have a pretty large autonomy over their millages. So they can decide, the governing board of those libraries, because those libraries, part of the establishment, is that they have governing boards. And a governing board means that it is the board that is legally responsible for the operation and the administration of the library. So it is not the municipality that is responsible for the operation and the administration of the library. It is the board. So the boards have the authority to determine how much of a millage they can determine to put a millage on the ballot. The law specifically states that it is not up to the municipality to decide whether a millage gets to go on the ballot. The board can decide, we're going to put a millage on the ballot, we're going to put our renewal on the ballot. District libraries are totally separate municipal entities. So those are kind of like quasi-municipal corporations. So a district library is the most autonomous entity that a library can be. And that board can actually levy their own millage and can levy their own bonds. So they have actually a lot of flexibility and authority. If you're a school public library, so if you're a public library that is overseen by a school district, you can't levy a millage at all. You can only be part of your school's millage or your school's budget. So your school's budget pays for your library. You cannot have a separate dedicated library millage. So as you can see, depending on what your library is, there are some very big differences. One of the biggest differences is if you are a city library under Section 1 of PA 164, which typically is a library that has a 5, 7, or 9 appointed library board, and was created via a charter section or an ordinance section in the city charter ordinances. This type of library is one kind of PA 164 library where the municipality may have a little bit more influence into the operations of the library through that charter or ordinance section. But still, the board would have the powers that are listed in the Act, which include complete control of the money and governance over the operation and rules of the facility and hiring and usually hiring of the director, although that is something that the city could decide to do in an ordinance. The millage for a PA 164 Section 1 city, so with an appointed board, that's one of the main differences. So if you're a city library and you have an appointed board, odds are you're an appointed governing board, odds are you are probably a PA 164 Section 1. If you're a city library and you have an elected board, you are probably a city library under Section 10A of PA 164, which is, a different kind of city library. So a Section 1 city library has a very unique millage. So they have two possible millages they can levy. One of them is an unvoted millage of up to 1 mil that the municipality, the city, has to determine to levy. So the city council and the mayor would decide whether or not they levy this millage. They have to decide it annually, and they can levy up to 1 mil just without a vote of the people. So they can just decide to levy it. And as I said, it's annual. They just can decide every year. Then a city, this type of city library can also levy up to 1 mil through a vote. So they could have a ballot question, a millage campaign, and levy a millage of up to 1 mil through that way. So they can have up to 2 mils in total of taxes. So this is the idea of levying a millage without a vote is a very unique thing in Michigan law. So it's very, very rarely does it occur. And so this is one of those instances when it does occur. Now you may be asking yourself, well, I'm a Section 1 library and I have a millage of 2 mils, a voted millage. There are some libraries, I believe, that do have that. That may not be strictly in comporting with the actual text of the law, but that would be a question for you to talk to your attorney about. Ultimately, you can't have more than 2 mils. So I think that's the rationale for that, as long as you're not levying more than 2 mils. But the law intends that one of those mils would be levied without a vote and one of those mils would be levied with a vote. But again, these are issues also to talk to your attorney about. So as I mentioned, your establishment determines your millage limit. So as we've been saying, township, city libraries, village libraries under PA 164 all have an ultimate limit of 2 mils. We just went over the Section 1 city that splits that up. District libraries have a 4 mil limit, but 2 of those mills can be levied in perpetuity, and 2 of those mills have the 20-year limit. So the first 2 could be levied in perpetuity. That's forever if you want without a limit. And then if you go for the second 2, or you go for number 3, then that would have the 20-year limit. A PA 164 millage, so those limits of 2 mils, you could levy in perpetuity. You could have a millage, what we call a perpetual millage. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. County libraries do not have a limit listed in the statute. And they also are an entity where traditionally the millages have been levied without a vote, and the law permits that. Most counties do levy with a vote. But their levy is under their municipal limit. So, that may be why they didn't put a limit in the statute. But okay, how do you find your establishment? Well, we're going to quickly go through this. So you can contact us, Joe and I, or you can contact the generic libdev email for the Library of Michigan, and just say, hey, I need my establishment documents. And we'll go through your file here. We keep paper files for every library based on state aid and penal fines. And for most of the libraries, it includes their establishment information, contracts, all that kind of stuff. So we'd go through it and we would figure out what you are. If you have a folder, hopefully most of you have a folder, your library director or you as a library director have a folder that has some of your historical documents in it that you can go through. You can look at, municipal governance meeting minutes. You can look at your library board minutes. As I said, you have the documents here, and contracts. All of those can give you clues to your establishment. What I usually do is first I look at the library's board structure. Is it elected board or an appointed board? How many board members do they have? Because that's going to determine, that is going to see, okay, this is how the library operates, right? So it has a 5, 7, or 9 member appointed board. It has a levy on the L 4029 that says it's levied under PA 164, and it's for a mill and it's unlimited. Then I'm going to look at that library and say, I bet that they're a PA 164 Section 1. And then after that, I'm going to go to the city's municipal code and the city's charter and look for sections on the library. And if all of that comes together, then it's generally pretty clear that it's a PA 164 Section 1. If I look at a city library and I say, okay, there's a charter information on their charter and ordinance, but it bears no resemblance to PA 164, Section 1, the way the board is set up, the powers. And then I look and it looks like either the board is listed as the municipal government, and all of the board members are like the township supervisor, or not, I'm sorry, not township, like the mayor and the city council, then I'll say, oh, that's a home rule city library where they're a department of their city. So sometimes the way the library is operating can give you a clue as to what the establishment is, or at least what the library believes its establishment is. And then you can often go from there. You can also look at what kind of millage do they have. You can take a look at the L4029, which is available at the Department of Treasury site. And it goes back to, I think, 2019 or 2018, but the new 2022 is there. It's by county. And what that is it's a document that tells you all of the millages that are levied for that particular municipality. So, and it will label them: fire, police, city operations, and then it'll say library, and then it will tell you whether it's a voted millage or whether it's under the statute. It will tell you the duration when the millage expires, or if it's in perpetuity, it will tell you how much. So that also can give you an indication as to the establishment that the library is operating under. So for example, if you're a library where you're a city library that is a department of the city, so the library director reports to the city manager, and you're levying an unvoted millage under PA 164, well, there's a problem there. And that's a problem you're probably going to want to address, because your millage and your establishment don't match. And that's something that you would definitely want to talk to your attorney about. Because there is some other, you could have a city that has in their charter that they're permitted to levy a millage for the library. So, but usually on the L4029, it'll say charter on there, but sometimes they make a mistake. So, but it's something you definitely would want to investigate. But sometimes it takes a little digging. I also have had to go into newspaper articles to find out how a library was established, and go all the way back sometimes to the 1800s, because we have some libraries in this state that were established before the Constitution was written. The Detroit Public Library is one of those. So, sometimes it's very interesting. Sometimes it's very frustrating. But if you need help with your establishment, let us know and we'll give you help. So here's something that is, I know, something Joe and I believe very fervently with, and I'm going to have Joe weigh in on this too. So we've been telling you, oh, make sure you know your establishment, make sure you know this, make sure you look at this. It's really important to read this stuff, right? So read your contracts. A lot of times, if you have older contracts, the beginning of the contract, which sometimes would be called a recitation, will actually say what law your library was established under. So that can be a huge clue to what your establishment is. Once you see that, go and look up the statute. Read the statute. Find out because the statute is going to tell you how many board members you should have, what millage you can go for, how much of a millage you can go for, what are the responsibilities of your board versus the municipality, how much authority does your board have, and that's all very important things, very, very, very important things. And if you're a city, read your charter and your ordinances, because again, that's going to give you a huge clue, along with PA 164, as to the authority and duties of your board versus your municipality. Do not assume just because we've always, thought that, I work very closely with my city, so I must be a city library. Don't assume that if I'm a city library, I have to be a PA 164 Section 1. Never assume. There are lots of libraries around the state that actually have had some establishment issues lately, and we've referred them to some attorneys, because sometimes it becomes a problem. Sometimes there's certain things that we just can't do if you're operating as the wrong establishment. And it can cause a lot of troubles down the road. Joe, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. Read your documents. Know what establishment you are. If you can't find your documentation, definitely contact us. We may have it in our files, or just by working through, like what Claire said, we're looking at the makeup of your library board, and are they appointed versus elected, and how many do you have? We can get there. We can kind of start unraveling it and figuring out where you're at.
Right. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm gonna go ahead. This is Joe. I'm gonna let Joe take over here.
Gotcha. Okay, so when you're computing your 3/10 of a mil in local support, in fact, I think we've got a slide that shows the equation near the end of this presentation. But what you would do is take your taxable value, and I'm going to show you where you can go find that pretty easily. You take your taxable value and multiply it by 0.0003 to get the 3/10 of a mil. And we're so focused on 3/10 of a mil because that is the bare minimum of local support you need to meet the threshold to be eligible for state aid. So what'll happen sometimes is when we look at a library and it's composed of multiple municipalities that it's serving, either as a part of their legal service area, so the collection of municipalities that came together to create the library, or as a collection of their legal service area plus their contracted areas, the ones they've worked with after establishing to offer services. We'll look at each municipality singly in this list, and I'll show you this. And we'll see who's meeting the 3/10 of a mil. But what we'll look for first is when we total all of the library's income and the full 3/10 of a taxable value, 3/10 of a mil of that, if all of the library's municipalities that are being served exceeds the total income brought in exceeds the total 3/10 of a mil, it's very easy there. The library gets full state aid. What can happen sometimes is, this is one of my particular soapboxes, is when libraries contract with an area for just state aid and penal fines. Very often those areas are not, for lack of a better phrase, pulling their weight for the income they're bringing in to get across that 3/10 of a mil barrier. So what I can do is show you, now this computation form sheet is available to all of you. It's available to the public. Let me see if I have that brought up so we didn't have to wait for me to hunt for it during the, there we go. Okay, so let me share my screen very quickly and I'll show you how to get to this. Okay, Claire, I'm gonna stop your screen share really quickly and
no problem.
Share mine.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so
that's actually really good because then I can.
Are we seeing that state aid webpage with the header? Is that showing up yet? So this page is right on the Library of Michigan's website. The shortcut to it is www.michigan.gov/library state aid. All together, and it'll take you here. But before I did this, before the meeting started, I went into Google and Bing and put in all different permutations of library, Michigan, and state aid, and it all takes you to this page. So if you don't remember that it's michigan.gov/library state aid, any search engine will get you here as long as Michigan, library, and state aid are in your search. So scrolling down here, if we go to public library computation form, it's going to give us 3 years to choose from. So right now, 2023 is not in there because that's what I'm working on with your data right now. But we can look at 2022, and I'm just going to put in, let's go with Kent. Kent's a good choice because they've got a lot of municipalities. There we go. Okay. So this is what I was talking about before. When you're looking at, there's your counted population. You can tell if this is from a legal service area or a contract population for each municipality as you go down. There's the taxable value, and you want 3/10 of that taxable value. And here it is right next to it. So the first thing I'm going to look at when I go through, so we go down to the bottom here, you see it totals it for you. So for Kent District Library last year, they needed $5,526,867 in local support to meet the threshold for state aid. Their actual income was over $23 million. So that's the first thing I see. I know that I don't have to worry about how many of these didn't meet the 3/10 of a mil by municipality because the whole library met the 3/10 of a mil, more than met, exceeded the 3/10 of a mil. And you can get to this for your library for 2022, 2023. Like I said, I'm doing it right now. So as I go through a library's report and look at the income, 2023 will start to fill in by library. So right now, if you just wanted to take a peek at it, just to kind of see what your 0.3 of a mil actually is, what your taxable value is for last year, you can see that now.
So 0.3 of a mil is probably the basement you should be looking
bare
at
minimum
for your millage to bring in. So let me go to the next page here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this slide answers the question of what we keep talking about, 0.3 of a mil local support, and it's income, but what is local support, Joe? What do we mean? Is it all the income? What is local support?
No, it is not all of the income. So your state aid that you receive from us is not going to be counted as local support. That's well, it's state support, not local. But your penal fines will be counted. Any appropriated funds from your municipality, that can be counted. Obviously, the millage would be local support. And all of those, if you have service fees for using the copier, renting out certain things, if you have fees around that, any fees that you have, that's other operating income, and that is local support. So a lot of the time when I find a library that's very, very close to the 0.3, but they don't make it as a library as a whole, we can look at the municipalities and see which ones are very close, or using that income that I just that other local operating income that I just mentioned, we can plug that into that municipality. Because what I'm trying to do is, if you don't make 0.3 of a mil for your whole area, I'm going to try to get you as much state aid as I can for your served population. So if I can use that other income, because your LSA is well over the 0.3, but the total isn't, and then you've got contracted municipalities that don't quite make it. If I can use that other operating income and put it to one of those contracted municipalities to drag it over that 0.3 line, that's what I'm going to do, because state aid is it's a function of a per capita formula. So you're getting state aid based on the number of people that you're serving. So like I said, when a library doesn't make it as a whole over that 0.3 line, we'll go in and we'll try to find as many of those service areas that can make it over, so libraries will get something in state aid.
Awesome. And if you have any questions about, if it looks like your local support, if you get a notice saying, hey, you don't have enough local support, and you have a question about what is local support or what your particular library has, don't ever hesitate to reach out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, so we talked about 0.3 of a mil, and then we talked about state aid and why that 0.3 of a mil is so important. Let's talk about, how do you know how much of a millage to go for? Okay, so if we think that 0.3 or 0.03, with 0.3 of a mil is the lowest amount, that you probably should try for to make your state aid, how do you know whether you should go for more? Well, or if you have an existing millage, how do you know whether or not you should raise it? And as all of you know, there's a lot of pieces here, right? You have your political climate in your municipality. There's a lot of pieces. So I'm going to take the political piece out of it right now, even though I know that's a big piece, but we're going to look at kind of the more quantifiable pieces. So your millage, most millages are in effect for a specific amount of time, right? So what you're going to want to look at is that if your millage, if you're going to go for a 3, 5, 10, 20-year millage, you're going to want to make sure that the amount of the millage that you get 10 years from now, or 6 years from now, or 3 years from now is going to be enough to cover the operations of your library, just as it would be good enough to cover this year or next year when you're going to levy it. So you have to kind of be a guesstimator and try to extrapolate out what things are going to look like and how much things are going to cost. And it's an inexact science. So one of the things you would do is look at your taxable values over, the past several years, and kind of look at, have they jumped really heavily because of a particular, situation in the country or marketplace issue, or something that happened in your town, like a big factory being built? Is it likely to jump? So does it seem like, are you one of those communities that might be having, a big battery, manufacturing plant put in there? And when that does, then your taxable values may go up. So there's all different kinds of things that could raise or lower your taxable values. If you're a community where your taxable values have remained pretty, pretty steady over the last several years, then that's information you could put into it. You can talk to your auditor, talk to your accountants. There's financial planners. You can talk to various entities that, might have a little bit more insight into this. And then look at your library's budget over the last several years and look at how the cost of materials have grown. Look at how labor costs have grown, insurance costs. Keep an eye on things like legislation. You know that there's a case sitting in the Supreme Court still on the issue over the raising of minimum wage and paid sick leave. A change in that decision could create huge amounts of extra cost for your library. Are you planning an expansion or a building expansion that might need additional staff down the road? What does your strategic plan look like? Are you looking at something in your strategic plan that might impact the size of your staff? So all of these are things to look at when you're looking at how much of a millage should I get? Because again, remember, your millage goes for, a span of time. So if you're not sure, you weigh a smaller millage, or you weigh a millage for a shorter amount of time against a millage for a longer amount of time. Well, if you have a longer amount of time, you don't have to renew it as soon, which, we all know that millage renewals can be a lot of work and kind of a pain, but then you run the risk of not having enough money and maybe having to put in for another millage before that first millage is up, and that can be an issue. So, again, as the board, if you are the governing board of your library, you have a fiduciary duty. And that fiduciary duty means it is your responsibility to always act in the best interest of the library, and it's your responsibility to shepherd the library and make sure that when you're done with being a trustee, which is why they call you a trustee, you're entrusted with the library. When you're finished with your tenure, there's still a library left over to hand on to the next group of trustees and to preserve for the community. So part of this is really looking, long term. You can look at penal fines and state aid amounts over the past years. If you go to the penal fine page at the Library of Michigan, or you go to the state aid page that Joe was just on for the Library of Michigan, where he jumped to the computation page from, penal fines have like 10 years of the per capita rates for each county. Right. So penal fines are the amount of money from the courts for fines gathered in violation of the criminal code and traffic fines. Those monies go to the county treasurers. The county treasurers then divide that money by the population and they get a per capita. Then that per capita, they multiply that per capita by your service area, right? Your legal service area, which is the population you have because of the establishment of your library, and then your contracted service areas, which are those areas that you service because of a contract you have with a municipality. They look at both of those areas and they multiply the per capita by the amount of people you serve, and that's your penal fines. So you can look at your penal fine per capita over the past 10 years and see how has it gone up, how has it gone down. Some of the factors that can make it fluctuate are changes in the law, raising speed limits, making marijuana legal was a big one. Changes in different right now we're looking at changes in different programs, which are the legislature saying, okay, we're going to fund these new programs with the penal fines they generate. And we're not going to give those penal fines to libraries. And that's okay because these are new programs. So we're not taking money away from libraries, but this means we're not going to add money to the library. So, there's all sorts of factors that make penal fines go up and down. So that's something to look at. And same with state aid. State aid is dependent on the appropriation from the legislature. Thanks to MLA, it's been steadily going up.
Yep.
But there have been circumstances in the past where it has gone very down. So hopefully that's not going to change over the next several years, but you don't know. So these are kinds of things you have to look at and balance. Anything you want to add there, Joe?
Yeah. So another thing with penal fines, local ordinances. There can be, if there's an infraction and the officer writes the ticket on the local ordinance, none of that money is going into the penal fines for your library. Right. Also, penal fines kind of make me cringe. So does state aid, because they're based on human behavior. State aid, that's part of the state budget, and that's decided at that level in the legislature. So, and we have been fortunate. We've been fortunate the last several years. It's working its way up. That's great. Still, it's going to be less than 3% of your income for most libraries. It's a very small piece. But the penal fine, I know a lot of folks count on those, and it's just so many things can happen to penal fines. Claire just went through an entire list, and it's really, I don't know. I see penal fines as, this is icing. Do not count on them. It's another nice little chunk of money for your library, but definitely don't base your millage decision on penal fines or state aid.
Right. And there's other things, the PPT reimbursement. You may have a Renaissance zone payment. You may have, you may be able to, if look at your existing millage, when you renew your millage, you should be able to exempt it from any capture from a DDA or a corridor authority. So there may be some incremental increases that you can expect with some parts of your budget, but these are the kind of things you just kind of want to get a big picture view of, and always kind of keep an eye on your strategic plan and what are you expecting for the future. Because you cannot accomplish any big plans unless you also finance those plans. Okay, there's some questions in the chat that I wanted to address real quick. So if Headley takes a library below 3/10, is that a problem? Joe, you want to answer that one?
Yes, that is a problem. The total income has to meet that 0.3 of a mil. Even if Headley takes you down, we can't use the fact that it was taken down by Headley to invalidate that you need the 0.3 of a mil in real local support. So
it's the money in hand that matters. I know there's some discussion in the legislature of messing with Headley to make this a little less onerous. I know the municipal associations are very keen on that, so we're keeping an eye on that, hoping that maybe that will come to fruition. We'll see. We have contracted townships that were contributing only penal fines for service. We are trying to renegotiate for the equivalent of 0.3 of a mil, but the city already meets and exceeds that for everyone. Well, here's the problem with that. So you have to look at this as when you contract with a municipality, you're contracting for a service, and that municipality, your board is contracting with that service as part of their fiduciary duty. One of the things they should be doing is requiring that municipality to pay fair market price for that service. Penal fines are meant to assist with municipalities in paying for service. They're not meant to be the sole payment for service. They never were. So when you are offering services, it's immaterial what your legal service area is paying. You need to look at it as a transaction. So, when you go into Target and you pay $10 for a shirt, and if someone behind you pays $5 for the same shirt, you're going to be a little irritated, right? So what happens is legal service areas that are paying a millage and paying, more, per household for library service than contracted townships that are getting the same service. A lot of times when people find out this is the case, they get pretty ticked off. Yep. And this is actually something that Joe and I have really fervently I've been trying to help with, because we see what happens when people get upset, and it's just not fair. It's not, you have to look at, is it fundamentally fair that your city is paying for the township next door to have library service.
Well, and is that the board meeting its fiduciary duty?
Right.
The other
is that
thing
is that in the best interest of the library to give service away basically for free? I mean, you say, as librarians, we have a duty and we all want everyone to have service, right? We're all altruistically want everyone to have service. But you also have to look at it like nobody can have service if we can't fund the service. So, you have to, in some ways, be uncharacteristically strict with some of this stuff. And if a municipality doesn't want to pay its fair share for service, they don't get it. And if people in that municipality want service, well, they could come and get a non-residency card, or, they could petition their municipality. They could use the power of their vote to bring somebody in who will provide good, reasonable costs for library service. Go ahead.
There's something else to add to the example of the shirt, because I think that for me, so the idea that the one person is paying $10 for the shirt at Target, and that municipality that's just paying penal fines and state aid is paying $5 for that same shirt, they're not paying $5 for the shirt.
Right.
They're paying $0.
Right. That's a good point.
Penal fines are bad behavior that occurred in that county, and it's divided up by the population served. So no,
right.
It's a $0 shirt.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Joe. Penal fines. There's a misconception by municipalities that penal fines are their money. It's not their money. Penal fines are legislatively, actually constitutionally provided for library service, and the way that the legislature decided to apportion it was through counties and through per capita. But the municipality has absolutely no control over those funds. It's like a light switch. The municipality can say yes, library service, no library service, but the municipality cannot determine, how, they have no ability to say release penal fines or use penal fines for anything but library service. And like Joe says, it's not money that comes from that municipality at all. So you're right, they're not paying. And yeah, state aid is a state program. So I guess we're all paying, right. Which is good, hey, yeah. So as hard as it is, I know that contract negotiation is not always the most fun, especially in certain areas. But what it really comes down to is, protecting your own. That if your municipality is paying, $120 per household, and I think we in Ingham County, we pay something like $300 a year, right, Joe?
Yeah, I think I'm at my last tax bill was like $370.
Yeah. Now, so if you have, local legal service area who are paying like that, and then you find out that a township is only penal fines and state aid for exactly the same service, that's kind of a bummer, right? That's not right. And then when you go for a millage, the next time you go for a millage, that could hurt you. Okay, so that's one of the things you're going to want to look at. Okay, so do you go for a perpetual millage or a time limited millage? So perpetual millages are great. It means that you don't have to ever worry about going back to get your millage renewed. The problem is, like we talked about before, if you got a 0.5 millage in 1920 or 1940, is that 0.5 still good in 2023? So that's still enough money. In a lot of instances, it isn't, because of how things have changed. So now, if you have a perpetual millage, now you're going to have to go for another millage in order to beef up that 0.5. And sometimes in a community members think, well, hey, you have a perpetual millage. I'm going to be paying forever for here. Why do you need another millage? Like, the perception of the voter is that this should be enough. Whereas when you renew a millage, yeah, you have to fight again, convince them that it's worth paying for at all. But you also have the opportunity to convince them that this is how much this really costs. So it's a benefit. It's a benefit calculation, a benefit risk calculation, but that's one of the things to think about. But perpetual millages are very stable. They're, like I said, they're ones that cannot go away. Incidentally, if you have a millage and you say, for example, join a district and your district millage, your language of the millages matter. So if your millage says like for district library and then you leave the district library, your millage will still be going to the district. So next week, Ann Surink is going to talk about millage language, and that's something that also is very important. Joe, want to add anything?
I don't know why I keep searching for the mute buttons in the same place every time. Yeah, well, like you said, perpetual millages can be great, provided that, you know, it's going to cover your needs for the future. You've asked for enough. Because, well, basically everything you said, Claire. You've got a perpetual millage. Why are you asking me for more money now? I have to give you money forever. As long as I live here, I'm going to be paying. And now you want more? I see it, you know, the idea that how it could hurt you if it's not put together, you know, thoughtfully. But unfortunately, some of these perpetual millages started in the 50s. So what do you do there?
Right. And there are some, you know, there are some library types that, you know, you may have trouble with a perpetual millage. You know, since we do have that constitutional amendment limiting, you know, 15 total mills for 20 years, you know, there have been court cases that have permitted, you know, PA 164 libraries, district libraries, you can have a perpetual millage, but like, for example, district libraries, you can have a total of 4 mills. The first 2 could be perpetual. After that, they can only be up to 20 years. So again, this would be a discussion to have with your attorney as to what's the right choice for you. I think Joe already did that one. So did you want to talk about, you already talked about this. You already did the local support.
I did. Does anybody have any questions about that, about the computation forms, how to get there, any of that?
And how everyone understand how to figure out how much money a millage will yield? Joe, you want to tell them how to figure out? Like if you have 3/10, if you were going to go for half a mil, how much money with your taxable value will you get?
Right. So this is kind of showing you the 3/10 of a mil. So you would just adjust this 3 to a 5 and multiply by 5. If you're going for 1 mil, multiply by 0.001. That would give you 1 mil. And that kind of gives you the idea of what your millage would look like and what kind of amount of funds you could, you know, anticipate receiving by your taxable value multiplied by that percentage.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, that's our presentation here. Joe, you have anything else you want to add? We'll answer some questions.
You know, I always like to make it clear that if you have any questions, we love talking to you. Please get a hold of us. I think that pretty much holds true for the entire library development team. Yep. If you have any questions, and if we don't know the answer, we'll get you to the person that does.
I wanted to mention that next week at the same time, so Thursday at 1 o'clock, we will have Ann Surink from Foster Swift. She's a library law attorney. We'll talk about developing the millage. She'll talk about, you know, writing the millage, submitting it, all of the legal aspects of running a millage, you know, getting your millage started, submitting your millage, getting a millage on the ballot. And then the week after that, we will have 2 other attorneys from Fahey Schultz, which is another law firm that has some library law attorneys. And they're going to talk about yes committees, or they're going to talk about how, you know, what are the legal issues involved in the board and the library staff and campaigning. And with, you know, having a yes committee, which is members of the public, like citizens and the Friends group that are running the campaign and the PR for your millage, and how those groups can interact. So that can be very sticky. And so they are going to delve into that. And then our last millage presentation on the 30th at the same time, 1 o'clock, will be our buddy Shirley, who is on this presentation, Shirley Bursama, and Val Meyerson from Petoskey. And Shirley is going to talk about tips for getting your millage passed and tips for talking about your millage with contentious groups. So getting a millage in a contentious time. So whether it's book banning or whether it's a municipal government aligned politically against you, or whether it's just an area that is very tax resistant, which we have quite a few here in Michigan. How do you get a millage? How do you discuss a millage with areas in those kinds of areas? Because it can be difficult. And then Val's going to talk about her specific experience in having a millage during a contentious time or in a contentious area. So I think that's going to be really, really interesting, both of those discussions. I'm very interested in those. Is there a list of every library millages and millage rate?
Yes.
Yes. I'm going to let Joe take that one.
So I'll share my screen. This is what libraries reported last year. Obviously, I can't give you the stuff that you all just reported because I'm working on it. So that'll be available early summer. But you can see what they reported. Let me stop
my share so you can share.
You can see what they reported last year. Now, on that section in the survey, we don't ask for information based on fiscal year. That trustees area and the millage area is based on what's happening the day you fill out the survey. So it's more current information. And let me get there. Here we go. So this is the statistics page. It's michigan.gov/library statistics. And here is the most recent public library data. When you open this, it opens as a multi-tabbed Excel sheet. So right here, click on millages, and it will show you what all of the libraries reported. We allow libraries to report up to 3 separate millages. So you can take a look here. You can see, for example, Alanson, scroll over, there's their first millage rate, their second millage rate, whether it was in perpetuity, when it was authorized, when it expired, if it did expire or is about to expire. So we have that for all 396 libraries. If they don't have a millage, you'll just see something like Allen Park where it's just blank. But all the libraries are on here. Everyone that completed an annual report, state aid application. So yep, that is available. As a director, you also have access to the reporting side of LibPass, where you can go in and create a custom report. And if you do that, that's on the green bar on the top of LibPass when you log into it. If you hit report templates, I believe there may be a couple of millage report templates that I've already built that you can go into and run your own reports. You can add filtering if you don't want to see everybody, like I showed you on that Excel sheet. But in the Excel sheet, they're all tables. So you can, in the lower right-hand corner of each row, or I'm sorry, each column, you can filter that report in any way you'd like based on what's under each column. So you can create your own, or you can use that report I showed you. That report I showed you is available to the public. It's all of the library data. You just got to navigate through. That's why there's a table of contents on it to easily get to millages.
And board members also have access to all of this stuff. You can ask your library director to run the report that you need, or you can contact Joe and he'll help you too. Well, we're at 2:01. So thank you. I hope y'all have a good rest of your week. Thanks a lot for coming.